Today we're going to be talking about novel strategies for ketogenic therapies for performance and beyond. So we'll talk a little bit about our background and then go into some potential applications. First and foremost, I think anytime I start a meeting with any of the teams that we have, I think it's always important to start with wins, like big wins. And I think there was a big win in 2019, and I know a lot of you have seen this. It's a huge win. But right now, one of the biggest challenges in the keto community is like there's this war, right? It's like there's like vegans and vegetarians and Danny Vega, right? No, I'm just kidding. It's like carnivores versus vegans and vegetarians, and it's like this riff, and it's like you're horrible, this is horrible. But with vegetarians and carnivores, I think there's a big win out of all of this. And that's the world record egg. I don't know if you guys saw that, right? We can all agree that eggs are amazing. And so we can come together and understand that, listen, no matter what, we're all trying to achieve optimal health, right? That's the goal at the end of the day. It doesn't matter if you take a vegetarian approach. I have friends like Dr. Will Cole, who published Ketotarian, that can optimally do that. Like if that's your decision and your choice, cool, just make sure you're taking the right approach. And I'm actually Danny inspired me to do this like carnivore experiment that I started yesterday at a Brazilian steakhouse with Suzanne and Josh. And I'm a little nervous about it because avocados are like my thing, if you can't tell, like love avocados. So it'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting experiment. But nonetheless, it's important that we all come together and understand what's the goal. At the end of the day, it's optimal health. And so a little overview of what this presentation will be about, our why, what's new. You'll see a little bit of a look inside of our lab that's literally 20 minutes away, called the Applied Science and Performance Institute. We'll talk a little bit about performance, anti-aging, and then what's on the horizon. What are some new things that you guys might not have seen before? So for me, this is where it all started. September 10th, 2002. I remember I was young. I could read. I couldn't read well, but I could read. And I remember reading the autopsy report of my grandmother. And this is what it read, right? An obese woman in moderate to severe respiratory distress, lethargic. And I was pissed. I was so angry. I was upset. I was like, that's not who my grandma was. Like, at the end of the day, she's gone, and that's what they have to describe her. And I was angry. I was angry at the doctors. I was angry at the people who didn't step in and say, Grandma, like, what happened? Why can't we change the way you're looking at what you're eating? Like, she was the most generous person I've ever met in my entire life. She would cook for an army, but it was all things that we look at now, and they weren't healthy. And so I looked at that, and I said, you know what? Like, what if down the road I could become something? What if I could be one of those voices that could prevent people from having that same distress, that same sadness, that frustration that my entire family experienced when that happened to her? She was 60 years old, way too young. And understanding that, what if you could be a voice of reason? What if you could be someone that can go out there and be the change and allow someone to really understand you can make alterations, you can make changes in your lifestyle that could do it. So I had two options. I really had two options. I could sit back and be angry, mad, upset, say doctors suck, they're horrible, they should have told her, they shouldn't have put her on all those meds, they should have done something. I could have sat on the sideline and complained, right? Which is what most people do. Or, like everyone in this room, you could take the alternate route, right? You could actually be the change. And you can go out and actually make a substantial change and help others along the way. And so that's what we decided to do. And that's really what the Applied Science and Performance Institute is all about. And so our goal is to really change the world by taking what was only accessible to the 1% and give it to the other 99%. And my partner, Dr. Jacob Wilson, he talks a lot. We've presented for the last decade in front of many academic conferences, in front of many academics, and won several awards. And you stand up there and you win awards, and you look out and you're like, this is the most unfulfilling thing I can imagine. Because you look out at all these PhDs and doctors and everyone you're presenting to, and you're like, you're the only people who are affected by my work. Like, you're the only ones that understand the actual research or the science or the publications that we're putting out. And it takes 10 years to get to the end consumer, like the people that actually matter, who want to implement it. So our goal is, how do we take that research, how do we take that scientific approach and get it out to the masses? And that's why we created ASPI. So I want to take you guys in. I don't know if I can control the sound, but bear with me. You'll see a little bit of what we do on a daily basis at ASPI. So that's a little inside look into some of what we do on a daily basis at ASPI. And it looks like there's a lot of high-level athletes, right? Working with the best of the best professional athletes, but ultimately the goal for us is, yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. I played sports my entire life. Like, it's cool to look at those athletes, but the reason we do that is because in an athlete, 1% difference can mean the difference between winning a championship and not even placing, or winning a gold medal and not even being on the stand. But if we can look at that finite amount, if we can take measures, what can that mean for someone who has Parkinson's? What can that mean for someone who has Alzheimer's? That 1% now becomes 25%, and that's a substantial change. So if we can get to the nitty-gritty and we can understand what measures we're able to take and how we look and track and measure these items in elite athletes, where 1% or even 0.1% can mean the world of a difference, how do we now implement that into people who truly need a substantial change? And that's what we're doing. So the first question we had, and this was dating back several years ago, Dr. Jeff Volek was giving a presentation to an audience about this size. And we were at the National Strength and Conditioning Association conference, and he was up there and he was giving his presentation on a study that he did with the legendary Dr. Steve Phinney. And he was talking about endurance athletes. And he was talking about, hey, here's all the benefits that a ketogenic diet can have for endurance athletes. At the end of the presentation, someone stood up and they said, but Dr. Volek, what research is there on resistance training individuals? Like, can you build muscle? Like, it seems so counterintuitive. And he goes, honestly, there are no studies. And so that's when it clicked for Jacob and I, and we said, you know what, this is the route we really want to start researching. This is the route I want to get into. I've been looking at this for so long. Why don't we try and start here? Why don't we try and look at muscle? And so this was really one of the first indications. This is actually from Dr. Jeff Volek's lab. And you look at different conditions, right? There's a low-fat group, a low-carb group, a low-fat plus resistance training, and a low-carb plus resistance training. And even like Dr. Westman said, you look here, the low-fat plus resistance training was just as good as just low-carb by itself, as far as decreasing body fat. It's incredible. And then obviously a synergistic effect when you get low-carb plus resistance training. And this has been known for years. For those of you guys who know like Keto Gains, you have Luis, you have my good friend Keto Savage, right? it's clear that it is possible to gain muscle, but it's never been studied. So we need to look at that. So we actually took 25 resistance-trained subjects. We placed them on either a ketogenic diet or a Western diet. We adapted them for 2 weeks, and this is where 90% of studies go wrong that you read in the research, is they never truly allow for that adaptation period. What they'll do, and everyone in here remembers like, oh, those first couple of days when you're first switching to a ketogenic diet. Well, what they'll do is they'll go, hey, let's put them on a ketogenic diet. Let's look at pre, and then let's look 7 days after. Well, yeah, of course performance is going to be down 7 days after. You're still adapting, right? You're still adapting to using a completely new fuel source. You've been primarily running on glucose and carbohydrates for 40, 50, 60 years, and you expect that change to happen in 3 days? It's not going to happen. To switch over to primarily using ketones and fat as fuel, it takes time. And so we adapted them for 2 weeks, and then we trained them for 8 weeks. And here you can see blood ketone levels, like obviously significantly higher in the ketogenic dieting condition than the Western diet condition. And this was lean mass gains. Both groups gained the same amount of lean mass at the end of the study. This is the first time it's ever been looked at, but it seems so easy for us to wrap our minds around, and I'll explain some of the mechanisms by why that's possible. But you wouldn't believe the amount of academic conferences that Jacob and I presented this day. This is back from like 2013 is when we first started this study. We presented this, and it was like, nope, you're lying. It's impossible. Not possible. Insulin's low. You need insulin to grow. There's no way you can gain muscle on a ketogenic diet. The data's there, and now I'll show even more emerging research that shows, yes, you can. And I think it's important for people to understand, like, yeah, it sounds like, oh, yeah, you might want to gain muscle, but I don't want to gain muscle. Yeah, you do. Everyone wants to gain muscle. Everyone wants to at least maintain or gain muscle. Because one of the things we'll talk about a little bit later on is something known as sarcopenia, or age-related muscle loss. It's a very, very important concept. It's one of the primary reasons people fall and get hip fractures and fall and have complications, and then it's all downhill from there. You need muscle mass. Male, female, young, old, it doesn't matter. You need muscle mass. So we wanted to look into this. The other thing that we saw was there was actually no differences in strength. A lot of times people go, oh, strength is going to go down. We didn't see that. We actually saw that there was a significant increase in testosterone. This was an all-male group in this study, and their testosterone just tended to go up, which makes sense, right? They're eating more fat. You have cholesterol. It's a precursor for testosterone, which is cool. Maybe a little natural test booster. No significant increases in cholesterol or triglycerides. Back then, that was really the only markers we looked at. Now we can go deeper and take deeper dives into things like NMR, lipoprotein profile tests, things like that. But back then we saw that, like, yeah, your cholesterol normalizes, your triglycerides normalize, which is exactly what Dr. Westman talked about. So then we wanted to follow this up. I don't know if you guys have ever seen, it's difficult to get a rat to like bench press. It's pretty tough. It's pretty tough. So what you do is you actually, so that's a weighted resistance wheel. So you put them in there, and they love to run. They love to run around. And what you do is every day you just slightly increase the resistance on it. So they're like, they don't even know it. They're just running, and then that's kind of how we resistance train them. So we resistance train them and basically looked at a Western diet versus a ketogenic diet versus a standard chow, which in actuality is like a healthy American diet, right? Versus like a Western diet, which is like a typical fast food diet, right? That's the way to kind of look at the difference between Western diet and standard chow. And what we looked at was muscle protein synthesis, which is a marker of muscle growth. And the thought would be, oh, the animals that were having carbs, they'd be higher, right? You're triggering more muscle growth because you have more insulin, which is important for muscle growth. And actually what we found was there's no differences. No differences in muscle growth. So this was really one of the first mechanisms of like supporting our human research that yes, you can gain muscle on a well-formulated ketogenic diet. In addition to that, there's new research emerging every single day on resistance training. CrossFit, right? CrossFit's extremely popular sport. It's a very high demanding. There was a good friend of ours, Rachel Gregory, did a study for her master's thesis on a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet combined with 6 weeks of high intensity interval training or power training and looked at body composition performance. And what'd she find? She found that body fat went down to a significantly greater degree on the ketogenic dieting group, and fat mass went down. They both maintained the same amount of lean mass, despite eating nearly the same amount of calories, despite eating nearly the same amount of protein. There seems to be this metabolic advantage to a well-formulated ketogenic diet over like even just a standard diet that's matched for calories and protein, which is really, really intriguing. And even powerlifters, right? There's new studies coming out on powerlifters. You would think like, oh, those guys, they probably have to eat a ton of carbs just to be explosive and be really strong. No differences in bench or deadlift strength in powerlifters that are on a ketogenic diet versus a Western diet. Crazy, right? Crazy. So how is this possible, right? This is the biggest question, like how? How is that possible? This is what people think happens to you, right? You're on that keto diet thing, you're gonna shrivel up. Yeah, you might lose some water weight, but like your muscles are just gonna shrink. But in actuality, what happens is this, right? You get the Danny Vega, you get the Danny Vega body. But why, right? Why? So there's two ends of the spectrum. I talked a little bit about muscle protein synthesis, which is basically like the light switch. Like when that light switch is on, you're building muscle. And then there's muscle protein breakdown. When that light switch is on, you're breaking down muscle. Two sides of the seesaw, so to speak. Well, the interesting part about this is that a ketogenic diet, like ketones themselves, work on both aspects of this seesaw. So we actually did a study in animals where we took animals, put them on a ketogenic diet, and even supplemented them with exogenous ketones to boost their ketones slightly higher. And the greater the degree, the greater the increase in muscle protein synthesis. So we actually saw that ketones themselves can be what we call anabolic, or muscle building to some degree. And on the other end of the spectrum, leucine. Who's heard of leucine before? Smart guys, I love it. Leucine is a very important amino acid that's responsible for like muscle building. People often supplement with it. It's in like what's called branched chain amino acids. Ketones themselves spare the breakdown or the oxidation of leucine. So it seems to be working on both ends of the spectrum, both muscle protein breakdown and muscle protein synthesis. It's really, really neat. And the question, right, the ultimate question, and I know you guys have probably heard this a lot, is like, what about this gluconeogenesis thing, right? You eat too much protein, or, oh, you're on a ketogenic diet, cool, you're just getting all your glucose from protein. And what gluconeogenesis means is just like formation of glucose from non-carbohydrate stores. And a lot of times people think, oh, that's protein, or those are amino acids. And they're absolutely right. It is amino acids. However, our bodies are pretty smart. Right? You look at branched chain amino acids. We did a study in animals looking at this. Branched chain amino acids, which are very, very important for like muscle growth and muscle building and overall health and function, no differences between a Western diet and a ketogenic diet. You look at one specific amino acid, alanine, which really serves no other function other than to contribute to gluconeogenesis, and it goes down. So it's as if our body knows, hey, yes, I can perform gluconeogenesis. I'm going to use it from alanine, not the important branched chain amino acids, which is very, very important and very unique. So the next question we had is, what about cyclic ketogenic dieting? What about like, hey, I'm going to do this Monday through Friday, but on Saturday and Sunday I'm going to crush some pizza, some real pizza, not cauliflower pizza. And you're like, what about that, right? Because there's some people who preach that and they're like, hey, you know what, just do it for 5 days a week, and on the weekend, just like, do you, boo-boo, like, just go. And it's like, all right, well, what happens? What happens? So here, in this study, we basically took two groups. We had a strict keto group that like went 7 days per week, and then we had ones that went keto Monday through Friday and then carved up on the weekends. And you can see here, these are level of ketones, right? And what happens is, if you think about it, the group that was cyclic wasn't in ketosis on Monday, because they just came off of eating carbs on Sunday. Not in ketosis Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it's like, oh, I'm feeling great. And then what happens Saturday? You go crush some regular pancakes for breakfast, right? And then, boom, you're back into it. So what would happen, even though both of these groups were eating roughly the same amount of calories, even though both of them were probably in a calorie deficit at the end of the study, both groups lost the same amount of weight. right? They both lost the same amount of weight. So some people that are advocates of a cyclic ketogenic diet would be like, that's a win. We lost the same amount of weight. But is weight the only thing that matters? No, right? The composition of that weight is what truly matters. And so we looked at fat mass, right? Because you want to lose fat mass. This is the ketogenic dieting group, and this is the cyclic ketogenic dieting group. So if they both lost the same amount of weight, but the ketogenic dieting group lost almost primarily all fat mass, what does that mean that the cyclic lost? Muscle mass, right? They were at a calorie deficit. They didn't have potentially ketones elevated enough to spare that breakdown like we just talked about. They didn't have ketones elevated enough to really trigger muscle protein synthesis. So these extreme carb ups on the weekends, probably not an ideal situation. The other question we have is, can we speed adaptation? And I'll play this video really quick because it's long, but this is our good friend, Ben Pakulski. He's Olympic, Mr. Olympia. The guy freaking competes and is one of the best bodybuilders in the world. And so we were prepping him for a show, and we used something called Wingates. Who's ever heard of a Wingate? Okay. So Wingates is like the most brutal form of high-intensity interval training. Basically mean all out, like all-out sprints as fast as you can for like 10 to no more than 30 seconds. And so we wanted to look at, can these Wingates speed adaptation? So here's what a Wingate looks like.
Here you go.
So I won't that was just 10 seconds. He did 30 seconds. And so that's what we use in the lab. Like we use that with the Tampa Bay Lightning. We use that with the Bucks, and they hate us for it. But it's a good measure of power as well. That's what it's used for in like science. But we like to use it for like glycogen depletion. So I wanted to look at this. I was like, wait, what if you did high intensity interval training? Can that help you speed up the adaptation process and maybe get over like that keto flu a little bit faster? And the answer is, it seems like that may be the case. So like traditional training, just like 60 minutes walking on a treadmill at like a low pace versus high intensity interval training seems to be a drastic difference. And what I mean, and so you guys know, like I don't expect everyone to go out and get a Wingate bike and be like, oh, I'm gonna go do high intensity interval training. I think that high intensity interval training is very individualized. For some people, high intensity interval training might be walking fast up a steep hill. That might be high intensity interval training for them if they're just getting started. For some people, it might be, hey, I'm gonna go on a treadmill and maybe bump it up to like 6 miles an hour, stand on the side and then run for 10 seconds and hop off, right? That's high intensity interval training. It's where you're at. And I think some type of, like if someone wants to power through, that can be something for people who are like, hey, I want to get into this, I want to exercise, I want to be active in it. It's brand new research. I'll touch on this very, very quickly. So I talked about how cyclic ketogenic dieting, right? Like carbing up a crazy amount on the weekends, probably not the best idea. What about a targeted ketogenic diet approach? This was a study that we did with our colleague, now Dr. Jordan Joy. Protein matched. They resistance trained 3 times per week, and they did cardio twice per week. And basically what they did was they incorporated in a small amount, very, very small amount of carbohydrates around their workout. And you look at the changes in lean mass, you look at the changes in fat mass, and there really weren't any differences between the groups. So these people, like, and again, these are people that are operating or working out extremely high intensity. They're doing 3 workouts per week, cardio twice per week, and their goal is performance. Their goal isn't just fat loss, like their goal is performance. You can incorporate in a small amount of carbohydrates, ideally around the workout period, right? You're quickly burning it, you're using it as fuel, you're using it to fuel that performance and move on. If the goal is fat loss, then it's probably not as good of an idea. Like it's all, the devil's in the dose of like, hey, how much do you have, when do you have it? But this is something for high level athletes that are really looking to optimize performance. But let's talk about a new topic. Let's talk about something new. And I'm gonna go through some new studies, some new areas in which we're exploring. The first one was a passion project of mine. She's going to hate me because I'm talking about her for this, but she's in the back with Scoot. But my mom has Crohn's, and she's had it for 20, 25 years. And I wanted to look, I was like, well, there's some research that like a well-formulated ketogenic diet can help. It's anti-inflammatory. So she's Italian, so like that switch is like, it's tough, man. Pasta, bread, it's tough. But I was like, Ma, like let's do this. Let's see what happens. So we did 90 days, moved her down to Tampa. I was like, hey, love you to death, but you're gonna be my lab rat for the next 90 days. Come on down. And so she did, and we put her on a lower carbohydrate approach. We didn't track macros. Similar to Dr. Weston's approach, it was just like, hey, here's recommended foods, eat this. And this is coming from someone who probably ate 500 calories a day, max, because there was such a, like, hey, I know if I eat this, this is the result. And everything caused her to flare up. Everything caused her to flare up. So I was like, you know what, just eat at will. Here's the foods to select from. And luckily she was living with me, so she knew that there wasn't gonna be anything else in there. So we actually looked at, on top of that, she started incorporating in 10 minutes of walking every morning, and she supplemented with exogenous ketones, which seem to have an anti-inflammatory effect as well. So the fat mass was great, like she felt amazing on it. But this was the most interesting. So we looked at a marker of inflammation called CRP. And to put this in perspective, CRP average ranges are from 0 to 4.9. She was at 47 starting. So extremely inflamed. And after 90 days, we got her back within that range. And now she's like all on it. She's all about it, including Scoot, the keto pup. He kind of keeps her on track with it too.